North Africa, 1943. The Tunisian sands are scorching, but for the German soldiers dug into these positions, a cold, creeping dread is starting to set in. Inside the headquarters of the Desert Fox, Erwin Rommel, there is a tense, suffocating silence. Only days ago, they were certain that the American forces, fresh off the landings in Algeria and Morocco, were easy prey. To these German veterans, battle-hardened from the sweeps through Poland, France, and Greece, these American divisions looked like nothing more than target practice. They expected the Yanks to turn and run at the very first blast of an 88mm flak gun. But instead of a panicked retreat, they were met with an onslaught that simply wouldn't stop. When the German Tigers, those steel predators that had become the ultimate symbol of Wehrmacht dominance, clashed with American Shermans for the first time, it wasn't just a battle, it was a reality check. It wasn't a catastrophe for the Americans as the Germans had hoped. It was the beginning of the end for the myth of German technical superiority. To understand what snapped in the German soul, you have to see this fight through the eyes of a Tiger tank gunner. He lines up his shot. He pulls the trigger. It's a perfect hit. You hear that thunderous metallic clang. The sparks fly, the smoke clears, but the American tank doesn't explode. It just reverses, shakes off the hit, and its crew, displaying a level of coordination the Germans couldn't comprehend, keeps firing back. The German generals were furious. They demanded answers. Why is that piece of junk still moving? They dismissed American tech as unreliable, primitive, and clunky. But they were missing the point entirely. American industry had achieved something Germany never could: survivability through redundancy. The Sherman wasn't designed to be the deadliest tank in the world. It was designed to be delivered anywhere on the planet, repaired in the middle of a muddy field with a wrench and a prayer, and sent back into the fight the very next morning. The German engineer saw the tank as a piece of fine art, meant to be perfected in the silence of a laboratory. The American engineer saw the tank as a tool, a rugged, mass-produced asset that needed to get the job done right now. While a German crew sat waiting for specialized parts to be shipped from across the continent, an American crew was swapping out an engine using nothing but a standard-issue truck and sheer grit. This created a psychological paradox that destroyed the German mindset. The German soldier was taught to believe his tank was an impenetrable fortress, but he began to feel exposed. He'd knock out one enemy, and two more would appear on the ridge. He'd disable a tank, and within an hour, a fresh one would be rolling into position. This endless flow of resources, this industrial river that knew no banks, began to erode the German spirit. When the Germans took out 50 American tanks, they'd celebrate. They'd write glowing reports about great victories. But when they woke up the next morning, the American lines weren't weakened. They were stronger than before. That breaks a man's will. Put yourself in the boots of a German veteran. You're a master of your craft, your tactics are flawless, your tank is better armored, but you're losing. Not because you're a bad soldier, but because your opponent has a bottomless supply of everything. You aren't fighting a military anymore. You're fighting a system that refuses to run out. A critical moment in this drama was the clash with American pragmatism. The Americans didn't play by the rules the Germans wanted to dictate. They didn't care about honorable duels. They brought air power, massive artillery, and logistics that moved like a heartbeat. When German soldiers were finally captured and sent to camps in places like Louisiana, they went into total culture shock. They expected to see ruins or chaos. Instead, they saw supply depots overflowing with food, fuel, fresh uniforms, and even cigarettes. For a man who had been living on meager rations for months, this wasn't just a sight to behold, it was a gut punch. They finally realized they weren't fighting an army, they were fighting the industrial power of an entire planet. This was the breaking point. The Germans finally grasped that their wonder weapons, the Tigers, the Panthers, the King Tigers, were just a temporary fix, a way to stall the inevitable. A bitter phrase began to spread through the German ranks. The Americans don't know how to fight, they just know how to win. It was the ultimate admission. The old rules of chivalry, tactical genius, and individual valor were dead. The era of the Industrial War had arrived, where the winner is whoever has the most factories, the longest assembly lines, and the most efficient supply chains. The story of Tunisia, and later Sicily, became the graveyard of German arrogance. Every Sherman they burned cost them massive effort, while the American economy didn't even notice the loss. It was a math problem Germany could never solve. And the scariest part for the Germans? That industrial torrent was only getting stronger. With every passing month, the American military grew more experienced, and their gear grew more lethal. Think of the contrast. The German officer in his fortified bunker, obsessed with planning the perfect maneuver, and the American commander who simply looks at a map and says, "We need more shells in this sector." And 48 hours later, 1,000 tons of steel arrive exactly on target. This was the victory of a system over an individual. It was the victory of industry over tactics. And it was relentless. The German soldiers who survived these battles later described the American advance like a rolling, unstoppable tide. You couldn't halt it. You couldn't turn it. You could only retreat until there was nowhere left to go. They were fighting the future, and the future belonged to those who could turn their resources into a force of nature. There was no romance in this clash of worlds. Just dust, the stench of cordite, and the distant roar of factories that echoed even on the front lines. The German soldier looked up at the sky and didn't just see planes. He saw thousands of Mustangs that had turned their skies into a no-go zone. He knew that every time he poked his head out of a tank or a trench, he was under the crosshairs of a system that could not be fooled. This series isn't just a history of battles. It's a story of how the belief in exceptionalism crumbles. It's about how professional soldiers and masters of war were forced to admit that their skill meant nothing against an opponent with the resources of a continent at their back. It was a clash that blurred the lines between war and manufacturing. The German generals who laughed in 1941 realized by 1943 that their laughter was the death rattle of their empire. It was here, in the North African sands, that the American war machine was truly forged. The same machine that would eventually tear through Europe, leaving nothing but broken promises in its wake. They weren't just learning to fight, they were rewriting the definition of victory. As we move to the next chapter, The War in the Skies, you'll see that this wasn't just success, it was total dominance. German aces who had racked up hundreds of kills suddenly found themselves outnumbered, outmaneuvered, and trapped by a logic they couldn't counter. History is unforgiving to those who underestimate their enemy. But it also teaches us that even the greatest army can be broken if it lacks the bedrock of all victory, a nation working as one unbreakable mechanism. Germany tried to prove they could win a game whose rules they had tried to dictate. But the game was over the moment America decided it was time to finish it. Stay tuned because the story only gets bigger and more dramatic. We're going to show you how Germany lost the skies and how every German pilot taking off knew, deep down, that he likely wasn't coming back. The stakes were set and the outcome was sealed by a force that could not be stopped. This is a story we cannot forget because it defined the world we live in today.